So I recently went through on stream and 100% Majora's Mask, and man, this game is amazing. In the last video, we ranked every mask, which I'll leave in the description, but today, I want to take a look at the dungeons. Now, there aren't as many as Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess, but what we got here are great. But which one is the best? Today, we're going to take a deep dive in each dungeon and rank them from worst to best. Also, I won't be including the moon since it really isn't a dungeon. But if I were to, it would probably just be last place. It's cool, but it's nothing special. Except for the final boss. Yeah, that's a fun fight. But if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. And with all that out of the way, let's get right into the rankings. Up first, we have Snowhead Temple. And I want to start by saying that even though the temple is in last place, I still don't think it's bad. In fact, I don't think any dungeon in this game is bad. Some I just prefer more than others. To get to Snowhead Temple, you have to get the Goron's Lullaby and put the Goron to sleep who's blocking your path to the temple. Snowhead Temple is the second dungeon in this game, and it has you utilizing a bunch of different items, most importantly the Lens of Truth. The Lens of Truth is cool, but I found myself missing a lot of stuff because I didn't think to use it. Specifically, stray fairies. There are a lot of stray fairies hidden behind walls that you need the Lens of Truth to see. One is in the middle room in the most random, hard to find spot, and the easiest way to get it is to fly there with Deku Link. But if you don't care much about stray fairies, you probably won't be using the Lens of Truth much. In this dungeon, you also get the fire arrows, which helps you melt ice that blocks your path. It can also be useful against those ice enemies. All it takes is one fire arrow to eliminate them. As for the theme of this dungeon, it's actually pretty unique. Snowhead Temple is mostly ice, but on the lower levels in certain spots you have lava, which makes this place a bit more interesting. Also, with the recently acquired Goron's Mask, you can get through the lava without taking any damage. This dungeon also has a lot of cool puzzles as well, some of which can be very tricky. But why do I have this dungeon in last place? Well, there are some negatives. Most notably, the huge middle room. I heard someone mention that the layout of the middle room is like the water temple without the water, and I can definitely see that. The room has multiple floors, and if you get to the top and fall, you'll fall all the way back down to the bottom level, which can be very annoying. Especially considering that there are places where you have to roll with Goron Link. And if you accidentally bounce off a wall, you'll probably fall all the way back down to the bottom floor. That part can be a bit annoying. I also found this place very confusing to get through, and I don't mean the puzzles, I just mean the layout. I never knew where to go next. And there were times where I'd come across a locked door and not have the key and have to go back and search for it. Some people may like temples that are more like a labyrinth, but this felt like a little over the top. Another positive though would be the music. It definitely gives off the vibe of the icy cavernous area, and I really like it. But my favorite thing about this dungeon has to be its boss. The boss you fight here is Goat, and it is so fun. It's pretty much a race where you can chase him as Goron Link and take him down by rolling into him. The funny thing about this boss for me is I would either destroy him almost immediately or it would take forever. The last time I fought him, I got hit by every rock, boulder, and bomb he would throw at me. But I still really like this fight. Overall, it's a really good dungeon with just a few things that held it back. This next one is probably going to upset some people, but we have the Stone Tower Temple. I have a love-hate relationship with this temple. There are a lot of things I love about this, but then there's a lot of things I'm not the biggest fan of. I want to first point out something that I don't like that much, that being the time spent waiting. There are a few places where you have to play the Elegy of Emptiness and it takes so long, and getting to this temple is already bad enough with that. And not only that, this dungeon has you using several items which has you going back into your inventory over and over again. Honestly, I think this was way worse than switching on and off the Iron Boots in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple. This dungeon has you using all the transformation masks, the light arrows, the hookshot, and occasionally bombs. Plus, you want the Great Fairy's mask too. There's just so much switching. But with that rant out of the way, the rest of the dungeon is actually pretty good. My favorite part has to be the mini-bosses. You got those eye guys who shoot their beams out of their eyes at you, which I think are called Igors. I may be wrong though. And I'm also not sure if you would call those mini-bosses or just strong enemies, considering they're just out in the main dungeon. Plus you got Gomez, who is super cool and quite challenging. Honestly, Majora's Mask did so good with the mini-bosses. Each dungeon has more than one. Another cool thing about this dungeon is not only do you get the light arrows here, but you also get the Giant's Mask, so technically you get two really cool items here. Now, another thing I don't like that much, however, is some of the rooms, specifically the room where you have to roll with a Goron to hit the switch in a short period of time. That room can be a little frustrating. Then there's the room where you swim as Zora Link and have to jump from the water onto the platform. I could never reach it and ended up discovering a glitch. If you put on the Zora's mask while next to the ledge, it'll raise you up so you can just grab it. It's pretty convenient. Then you have the coolest thing about this dungeon, that being that you can literally flip it upside down. Seeing everywhere you had previously been now on the ceiling is so cool, especially in the first room where you see the sky is now below you. It almost feels a bit like a different dungeon, and I think I prefer the upside down portion more. Plus, it has a different theme that plays as well. I actually think the themes of this dungeon are my favorite part. They're just so catchy. Lastly, we have the boss of this dungeon, that being Twin Mold. It's probably one of the weaker bosses in this game for me, if not the weakest. You'll want to use the Giant's Mask to grow big so you can slash his tail or face with your sword. Now you don't have to use the Giant's Mask and you can use your bow, but it'll just be a lot tougher and probably way longer if you don't. I will admit I kinda like the 3DS version of this boss a bit more. Even though most of the bosses in this game were a downgrade, I feel like Twin Mold kind of improved. This time with the Giant's Mask, you don't have to just stab him with your sword. You can pick up boulders and throw at him and swing him around almost like you're swinging Bowser around from Mario 64. But I'm specifically talking about the N64 version, and this boss drags it down just a bit for me. At the end of the day, the Stone Tower Temple is a solid dungeon with a couple of tedious and rather slow parts, and a not so great boss that holds it back a little bit. Next up, we have Great Bay Temple, and unlike a lot of people, I actually really like this dungeon. I've never had much trouble getting through Great Bay, or any water temple really. I actually enjoy them. I mean, come on, look at this place. It's so bright and colorful, and pretty cool looking. Also, to get to this dungeon, you have to climb on the back of the turtle, and he takes you there. I actually think the entire Great Bay section of this game was my favorite part of this whole game. The main goal of this dungeon is pushing levers to change the direction of the water current. At first you would think it would be hard to get around, but if you follow the colored pipes, it shouldn't be too bad. Plus, swimming around here as Zora Link is really fun. You've also got a wide variety of enemies here, which I didn't mention till now. In other Zelda games, each dungeon has a couple of enemies that fit the theme, but in Majora's Mask there are a lot more. This dungeon has the skeleton piranhas, it's got the hands that will grab you and just throw you. It's got the Deku Babas that hang from the lily pads, and if you cut them off, they grow feet. Those guys are actually kind of terrifying. There's so many more as well. It's so nice not seeing just a few different enemies. You've also got multiple mini-bosses, and I think this game has some of the best mini-bosses. You've got mini-bosses such as Mad Jelly, the frog that hides inside the bubbles, and you've got Wart, which is a throwback to a boss from A Link to the Past. Honestly, Wart would have made a better boss than Gjorg, but we'll get to that later. In this dungeon, you also get the ice arrows, which are my favorite arrows in this game. Unlike Ocarina of Time, they can actually freeze water and enemies. Unfortunately, they were nerfed in the 3DS version, and you could only freeze sparkling spots in the water, not just anywhere, which kinda ruined them for me. But here, they are great. And lastly, we have the boss of this dungeon, Gjord, or George. Yeah, I like calling him George. This boss is kinda cool looking, but that's about it. He's very boring and not that fun to fight. You have to stun him with arrows or your Zora fins, then go down and hit him as Zora Link. The only attacks he really has is he'll eat you, which takes a lot of health and is kind of annoying. Once he's close to dead, he will also send out baby Georges, which you can easily dispose of. But overall, a very fun dungeon held back only by the weak boss. If the boss was better, this could have become my favorite. And the last dungeon of the day, being my favorite dungeon in Majora's Mask, is Woodfall Temple. This dungeon is nearly perfect for me, which is crazy considering it's only the first dungeon in this game. Woodfall Temple actually feels like a temple, and not just a cave or a tower or anything. It's found deep in the heart of Woodfall, and man is it fun to play through. Now I know a few people may complain that it is pretty small, but honestly I don't mind. And if I'm being honest, with the layout, it doesn't really feel that small. This temple has you using Deku Link a lot, mostly since this is one of the few things you have available to you. There's also a lot of fun platforming with you shooting Deku Link out of the flowers and over to another. There's also the cool purple poisonous swamp water. I gotta give credit to the way this dungeon looks. I love the dungeons that are mostly foresty and jungly, and this temple definitely gives me that vibe. Plus the music is probably my favorite dungeon theme, with Great Bay being a close second. But honestly, every dungeon theme in this game is great. I actually think this game has my favorite soundtrack out of all the Zelda games. Another highlight of this dungeon is all the memorable rooms, such as the room with the wooden bridges and the big stone block in the center, the room that is pitch black with the little creepy shadow guys, then you have the room at the end right before the boss. Every room in this dungeon is just top tier for me. This dungeon also has a couple of cool mini bosses, and while they may not be as cool as Gomez or Wart, they are still pretty fun, especially for a first dungeon. We also get the bow here, which is one of the most important items in this game, considering every later dungeon gives you a different elemental arrow. Then my favorite part of this dungeon, the Woodfall Temple boss, is Adolwa, and this is my favorite boss in this game. Yeah, Goat is fun, but I like this boss just a bit more. Not only is Adalwa super cool looking and has several flashy attacks, there isn't a specific way to beat him. You have so many ways to take him down. Want to use Deku Link? Go ahead. Want to use the bow? Sure. Bombs maybe? Yeah. Or you can just 1v1 him in a duel between swords. All your items are useful here in this fight, unlike most bosses where you specifically have to use the item you acquire in said dungeon. It just makes this boss stand out and each time you fight him feel a little bit different. Overall, this dungeon is nearly perfect in every way, which is why it's my favorite dungeon in all of Majora's Mask. There you have every dungeon ranked in Majora's Mask. Let me know below what your ranking of each dungeon is, and if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and checking out some of the other videos as well. We also stream here almost every day, and right now we are playing through Twilight Princess. But that'll do it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.